Okay. Thank you everybody for joining us today for this month's Lunch and Learn series all about motivating behavior change. Okay. Let's see. All right. My name is Amber Schultz. I'm the Wildlife Education Program Manager for the Fish and Wildlife Division, Fish and Wildlife Education Division. And I'm really excited about these series. This is the third one so far, and it's going to be a year-long series done once a month, just touching on education and science topics and looking at the science behind some of the interesting things that we do, and just to bring that forward and to help us be better in all the different positions and roles we play for the agency. So here is an overview of the Lunch and Learn series at large. The first one we did was education, interpretation, outreach, and marketing. And the last one was all about how people learn, the science of how people learn. Today's topic is motivating behavior change, which I feel could probably apply to a lot of us, whether we are biologists or educators or division leaders or even customer service folks. So all different types of people could probably benefit from learning about what the science is behind there. The next one coming up in April is the role of the educator in engaging audiences and conserving natural resources. So really talking about how education plays a role in the overall mission of our agency of conservation. May is going to be all about science literacy. And then June should be extra fun, communicating controversial topics and teaching through teaching tough subjects. I'm just gonna remind everyone before we get started, like I said, I really enjoy and appreciate discussion through these. These are meant to facilitate discussion and thinking about what we learn from these and how we can apply them in our everyday roles as Game and Parks employees. So when it's time to discuss, you can either, I'd love if you unmuted yourself and chatted with us, or you could use our chat button as well. I will also have some polls in this one. And then another reminder at the end of this, I'm going to make sure to email everybody, and I'd love to hear from you. What did you enjoy? Do you have any suggestions on how to make the series even better? Are there any future topics you'd like to learn about? I always really appreciate input from our staff of how to make this best. I'm joined by my co-host today, Grace Gard. Grace, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Grace Gard in the education division as well, and I'm the aquatic ecology education specialist.
Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is motivating behavior change. And I'm breaking that down into a few different sections. First of all, what is behavior? Most of us probably have an idea of what it is. We'll talk about how it's defined, maybe some theories. And then we're going to really dive into understanding human instinct, what comes naturally to us that's going to help us think about how to apply behavior change. We're going to look at ways to work with human instinct, so actually applied, tried and true methods, best practices to actually influence behavior change in the contents of what we're trying to do. We as an agency, we're trying to promote stewardship, we're trying to conserve species and habitat, and so those are the things that we're wanting to influence behavior change about. We're going to apply what we've learned, so I want to make sure we have time. I have 3 different scenarios at the end where we're going to take maybe what we learned today and discuss how we could apply that to real life scenarios that our agency has faced. And then of course, reflection and questions. At any time you have a comment or a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Grace will monitor that. And when I come to different sections, we'll make sure that we address those, okay? Okay, first of all, what is behavior? So there's actual definitions of behavior. The science of human behavior is really studied and found in a lot of social sciences. There's actual behavioral scientists that study this, psychology, sociology, anthropology. A lot of different sciences kind of blend together to create some of these theories and some of these definitions that we now know today of how we understand what behavior is. So behavior at large is just actions or reactions of an organism often in response to the environment. So just that basic thought of what a behavior is, you know, if we are all watching birds out our backyard, which is something that I love to do, just watching that bird, you know, hop around and then look for food, that is, we are observing a behavior that organism is doing. And behaviors can be conscious or unconscious or voluntary or involuntary. Human behavior specifically, that's a little more personal to us because we are not birds, we're humans. So how we define that, it's a collection of activities that we do on a daily basis. And often it's influenced by way more than we even consider, or way more than we intuitively think about. Our behaviors can be influenced by our attitudes, by our emotions, by our values, our ethics, even our culture, persuasion, or coercion. So we'll dive into that. So how do we decide how to behave? Well, there's a really cool theory. Now, during these series, I could absolutely nerd out about all these exciting theories and the science behind everything, but I promise I will spare you because I get really excited about these kind of things. However, I am going to just at least let you know some of these theories, and if you want to dive in more, I have some resources to send you afterwards, or you can Google it and search it for yourself. So there's the most renowned theory in how we behave is called dual processing theory. And what it talks about is we have two different systems, believe it or not. We are less in control of the things that we decide to do every day than we would originally think. And so there's one system called the automatic system. And that system, it responds really quickly. It's unconscious. We don't think about it. It's involuntary. Think of if one of you were standing in front of me and maybe someone like threw a basketball right towards your face, you would probably duck, or you would go to catch it, or something like that. You didn't really think a lot about that. That was instinctual, that was automatic. So that's that type of system. It's the kind of things that we do on a daily basis that we almost forget about. This is really where your habits are formed. You know, most of us brush our teeth twice a day. A lot of times we're just doing it, we're going through the motions, we're doing that automatically. So even like that, that's an automatic system. And it's rapid processing. So it's a way of processing information around us and making those decisions, but it's happening really fast. It's more reacting than responding. One thing that's really interesting to me is, as far as energy goes, it's low effort and it doesn't take a lot of energy. And what I mean by that is literally like actually energy that we consume food every day to get our energies. This takes a very small amount of energy versus the other system, which is a reflexive system. Now this system is, we are doing conscious reasoning. So an example of this is if I gave you a puzzle to solve, you'd have to sit there and think about it, or a math problem, or maybe you're figuring out what you want to do on a Saturday evening, or maybe at work you're working together in your team to try to solve an issue that's got up. This takes reflective or reflexive thinking. It's voluntary, we have to think about it. It's slower, it's controlled, it's high effort. This takes a lot more energy. It's really interesting some days if you, and maybe other people are like me, but if you realize, you know, for work, maybe you were in front of a computer for 8 hours or something, or you were involved in some really intensive meetings, and afterwards you kind of feel exhausted, which seems silly because you've been sitting the whole time. But thinking like this and literally using our brain takes actual energy. And so that's one of the components of this system. It's rational and logical, and it's thinking before you respond. And something my mom always taught us when we were kids is try to think of, when you're in tough situations, think about responding instead of reacting. So reacting is like, you know, if you get angry really quick because something upset you, versus pausing, thinking about it, and then responding. That's what I think of these two systems. Automatic system is that quick reaction we don't have to think about, and reflective is things we have to think more about and we respond to. So understanding human instinct. So there's some kind of basics of human instinct that go along with these behavioral sciences that help us understand, you know, what it is to be human, how it influences how we behave, and then how we as, maybe people who want to motivate behavior change can use that to the best of our abilities. So one of them is really interesting, is we hate to lose more than we enjoy winning. Now, a lot of these things that we're going to talk about, these are all, backed by scientific studies, and they're science-based kind of truths or findings. So this is called loss aversion, and it's one of the most powerful motivators in the behavioral sciences. In fact, there's been studies done time and time again that's proven this. For example, one of them was letting participants know that if they flip a coin, if it's tails, they will lose $100. And if it's heads, they will gain $100. So equal amount of loss and gain. And what they found is that participants were not willing to do this bet until they kept going, they kept pushing the gains up. Okay, well, would you do it if you lost $100 on a tail, but you won, let's say, 150, and that still wasn't enough? And most participants finally did it when it was twice as much. The winning had to be twice as much as the loss. So in other words, we are more upset about losing $10 than we are happy about gaining $10. So loss aversion is a very powerful motivator. That's why criticism often has a stronger impact than praise. We remember, that time where our supervisor or maybe a spouse was critical of us far more than we remember a compliment. In fact, one study I read said that it often takes 5 nice things or compliments from your spouse to overcome one kind of critical argument, which is really interesting. So we often behave irrationally. And actually for this one, before I do that slide, I'm gonna start a poll. And so this poll is gonna be 2 questions. And this first one, if everyone can see, how many 8-ounce glasses of water are we recommended to have each day? So go ahead and answer this poll if you can. And you're not gonna be criticized for the wrong answer. No worries, your best guesses. I'm just going to do about 30 seconds. Okay. So 56% of our participants thought that 8-ounce glasses of water is a recommendation, and that is true. That is the right answer. So over half of us guessed that. So with that understanding, let's see, stop. My next poll is this, and please be as honest as you can in answering this next question. How many 8-ounce glasses of water do you think you drink each day? Like, let's say on average. Okay, so we can see here, it's set, like according to everybody's knowledge, over half of us know that 8 glasses of water is the best for us, but it seems like most of us are getting probably less than that. My goodness, I myself am included, especially in the winter for some reason. I can't seem to remember to drink enough water, even though I know it's good for me. I can't seem to take that intent and make it actually a behavior that I do. So this is really interesting, and it goes to show that at the end of the day, we often behave irrationally. As much as we want to think of ourselves as rational human beings, often we know what's good for us, but we don't do those things. Often we know what's not good for us, but we do those things. Think about, texting while driving. If we could all be honest, I wonder how many of us actually do that often, text while drive. I know, unfortunately, I do often, even though I know it's not good for us, and I know it's not a good practice. Or think about, how much fruit we know we need to eat every day. I feel like I get far less fruit than maybe I should. You know, we know this stuff. And what this is saying is it's not just enough to have information for people to make behavior changes. A lot of us know that recycling is good for the planet, or a lot of us know, you know, basic things we can do to help wildlife or to improve habitat in and around our areas. But it's that link between that information and actually getting to do that. We live in the now. There's more energy to rely on working memory. That's getting that reflective system. You know, really thinking about what is the right thing to do and actually doing it. So the other one is about our attitudes, and I'm going to do another poll really quick. So how much do you agree with this statement? Recycling is important for healthy communities and ecosystems. Do you not agree at all, agree a little bit, agree, or agree a lot? A few more seconds. Okay. So it looks like most of us at least agree a little, and the majority of us agree or agree a lot. And so that's good, and that's good to know. I agree with that as well. I know it's really important. So then, now this is another one where I really want you to be as honest as you can. How often do you recycle on average per week? Do you not recycle at all? Do you recycle a little bit? Do you recycle about half of what you could, or most things that you can? Okay. So you can see, you know, some of us, we actually don't recycle maybe as much as we believe we should. And what this is showing, and way to go for the 52% who recycle most things. That's fantastic. I wish I was better, even though I know it's very important. I know I can always improve on that. What this is showing is, this is really unintuitive, but our attitudes don't always predict our behavior. So for an example, I know that, you know, I consider myself someone who has environmental values and environmental attitudes. I know that recycling is important. I know I should probably eat less meat. I know I should probably try to bike rather than drive as often as I can, but that doesn't always predict my behavior. That doesn't always predict exactly what I'm going to do. Attitude itself is really interesting. It's an interesting concept in the behavioral sciences. It's more than just one thing. It's composed of how people think, how people feel, and what their intention is. And again, I'm going to just shed a little light on some science. I won't dive into it, but if you're interested in learning more, there's a really great theory called the theory of planned behavior. And what that does is it discusses exactly how attitudes do influence your behavior, but there's more than just attitude. There's also the norms of like what's going on around you. Are other people in your office recycling? Are they not? And there's also the intention, not just I believe or I think recycling is important, but also people actually saying, I intend to recycle. Something interesting is that the intention is way more important to predicting that behavior than the attitude. Okay, this one is a really interesting one. So we don't actually know ourselves as well as we think we do when it comes to understanding what might motivate us to take, you know, to make responsible choices or to make positive impacts through our behavior. There's a really cool example of this one. Some hotels, there was some studies on reusing towels in hotels, And because when you reuse a towel, you're saving water, you're saving energy, and really you're lowering the carbon footprint. And so it's an environmental behavior that's a positive one. It also saves the hotel money as well. So there's a lot of impacts there. It doesn't probably really have any effect on you as a guest though, right? So whether you reuse your towel or not, it's not going to affect your stay. So you really have to be thinking of other things. So a hotel chain decided to kind of put out a study to see what message would most encourage people to reuse their towels. And they put out some surveys, and some of the messages, the potential messages were, reuse your towel to help us protect the environment. And some of them were, reusing towels, saves this much money for us. And some of them were talking about, one of the statements was, other guests in this hotel reuse their towels 75% of the time, just a blanket statement like that. And so people were supposed to predict which of these messages would help actually influence and help actually improve them reusing their towels and increase that reuse rate. And most people predicted that reusing your towel to help us protect the environment, that statement, was going to be the most motivating statement that they could see in their hotel room that would get them to think and help reuse their towels. So that's what they predicted that would motivate them the most. But what really happened was when that statement was used, about 38% of guests reused their towels. But interestingly, when the statement about what other guests were doing in that same hotel was used, 58% of people reuse their towels. So what does that tell us there? Even though maybe we have a value for the environment, that was not as important or as a powerful motivator as understanding what other people were doing around us. So that was really interesting. And that's found a lot in behavioral science studies, that social norms and talking about what other people are doing is really, really powerful. And this goes to this slide right here. We have a strong pack mentality. We're social creatures. It's one of our strongest basic instincts. We are constantly, whether we know it or not, we're mirroring the behavior of people around us. If we were all in a room right now and we were all chatting, maybe like in a circle, and if I started whispering, without even thinking, other people would start whispering too, until they didn't even know like why maybe we're all whispering. Or think about if you've ever walked by, oh man, especially like think about Black Friday. If you see a long line of people all of a sudden lining up in a store, a lot of times people will just start to line up without thinking too much. So we just have a strong need and motivation for belonging, to be part of a group. And that's just a really, really strong instinct in us that's helpful to understand when we're thinking about why we behave certain ways. So understanding all of those things, before I move on, are there any questions, Grace? Peer pressure from Christy.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's pretty much
Yeah,
it right now.
It's interesting, but peer pressure works. Of course, it works in negative ways. Oftentimes, I'm thinking like in junior high and high school. But when we're thinking about creating messaging campaigns or conservation practices, peer pressure really actually does work. It's a strong instinct. So how do we work with this human instinct in influencing behavior change? There's this really cool analogy by, his name is Dan Ariely, I believe, and he's a behavioral scientist. And he talks about behavior change thinking about a rocket ship. So a rocket ship has to do two things to get to outer space. It needs to minimize that friction through the atmosphere, as it goes through. So it needs to reduce the friction, and also needs to maximize the fuel or increase the fuel load to really jet blast through the atmosphere to get to outer space. So he thinks of a rocket ship as behavior change. There's two really important things that are kind of going to dictate the best practices of trying to motivate people to make behavior changes. One of them is reducing friction. And so what friction is anything that gets in the way of someone performing a positive behavior. There's an example of, in some studies, they were looking at which countries had more organ donations or organ donors sign up. And they looked at different ways that they would ask people if they were interested in becoming an organ donor. So in the study, they kind of polled everyone, and they found that there was an equal amount of people who thought it was important, who had the value of it, who their attitudes said, organ donation is important to me. But in one country, they had way more organ donors. And it was not because their value is different, it was because one country was an opt-in. And so it was just by default. It was by default that you would be an organ donor unless you opted out, unless you went through the paperwork and opted out. And another one was you had to fill out paperwork to become a donor. And the default program had far more organ donors simply because people hate paperwork. And that's a really big, interesting theme in a lot of behavioral scientists or behavior science studies, is even people doing an action as simple as having to mail something back to get $10 or something like that, they're just far less likely to do it because it's a friction. It's one more step they have to do. A really interesting example is everybody think about Netflix. And what did Netflix start doing? I don't know how many years ago. When you start watching an episode and it ends, it automatically starts the next one. Think about how much more binge watching we do now, maybe even unintentionally, because it's not letting you have a choice. It's just going for it. It's reducing that friction for you to sit there and think, what should I do next? And then increasing fuel. Fuel is anything that makes that positive behavior more appealing. Maybe it's an incentive, maybe it's a reward, or maybe it's just somehow in different ways using social norms, motivating people to do that thing. So it's not just information. Just information fails. People know that they should eat healthier. People know that maybe they should get so many steps per day to be healthy. People know that information on its own doesn't work. They need more motivation. They need to increase the fuel. If you're interested in reading more about this is a really great book. It's called Predictably Irrational, and it's by this behavior scientist who talks about this analogy. He has really great TED Talks too. Okay, so now we have understood some basics of human instinct, and we looked at what behavior is. What we're going to think about now, remember those two systems, those automatic and those reflexive systems. We're really going to think about how we can work with all these things to influence positive behavior change in what we're looking at. So one of the big things, instead of focusing on the human, change the environment, make it easy for them to make that behavior change that we want. An example is one of the studies showed there was this area with this beach, this huge public beach, and litter was a horrible problem. And there was even trash cans and recycling cans throughout the beach. I don't know how many, but it didn't work. You know, there was still a really bad littering problem and people weren't recycling. People were throwing, when they actually still were picking up their stuff, they were throwing like aluminum cans in the trash constantly. The trash cans were both dark green. They were right next to each other. There wasn't a lot of labeling. And so one implementation of the study is that they decided to color code the trash cans, a very simple thing, but it stood out, and we are pattern seeking humans. We're constantly looking for patterns. And so we saw that there's different colors, and there was even not just text, but symbols of, aluminum cans go here, or plastic goes here, trash goes here. And within a few weeks, the amount of littering decreased tremendously and the amount of recycling increased tremendously just from making simple changes in the environment. Set behavioral expectations. This is a funny one because if you think about, why most of us go around and when we leave a room, we shut the light off, or when we're brushing our teeth, we shut the water off. I don't think we're all sitting there thinking, I want to make sure I'm saving energy today every single time. It's almost reflexive. And oftentimes it's because, think about growing up, the behavioral expectations that were set in a lot of our households. I know for myself, I remember my mom and dad constantly saying, you need to shut the light off. Don't forget to shut the light off. So our parents, our guardians actually knew about this fun behavioral science trick, setting those expectations. One of the studies showed that putting little placards that said, remember to shut the light off because we want to save energy above each light switch at a school actually increase their energy savings by a tremendous amount. and it increased people remembering to, especially students, young students, remembering to shut that light off. Because what that's saying is it's a reminder, it's setting the expectations. It's not just a sign that says the rules. It's setting an expectation that in this classroom, in this school, we value energy savings. We value remembering this and thinking about this. And so it uses some of those behavioral expectations and also some of those social norms of what is expected in this kind of culture in this building. Relatable and tangible. This is really important. So a lot of times, especially maybe as scientists, we care a lot and we're passionate about, let's say, climate change, for example. And so, remember, information alone doesn't influence, it doesn't help motivate people to change. So I could talk until I am blue in the face about how our carbon emissions are too high and we need to reduce them, and the polar ice caps are melting and things like that. But until I make it relatable and tangible to my audience or to the particular people I'm talking about, it's going to be harder for them to really care enough to be motivated to do something about it. So definitely want to avoid science jargon. You want to make it palatable for your audience. What's that person's benefit of participating in that behavior? Yes, to us, we want to make sure that we're increasing habitat diversity or we're taking care of our ecosystems. But is that relatable and tangible to that person that we're actually trying to work with? And so trying to find that. There was a cool study done about energy savings in households, and they were trying to get people to seal up windows, especially in a neighborhood with older houses. There was lots of cracks in the window. And so that was resulting in, loss of heat, which is increasing your energy bill every month, and it also increases your carbon footprint. And so one of the first study looked at, they just gave every homeowner information. If you simply seal your windows, and I think they gave them the equipment, it will help you decrease your energy waste. And during that procedure, about 20% of the homeowners took part in that program. And so then the second method they used is they decided to make it relatable and tangible to that audience. So they actually figured out and calculated how much of like a hole or space, and they took up all the windows in a house, in the average house in the neighborhood. And they realized that all the little inefficiencies in the window was the equivalent of the size of a basketball. So their next ad campaign said, if you don't do this, you essentially have a hole the size of a basketball in your house that is losing heat, that is losing electricity, and that you're paying for. And because of that, and remember loss aversion, remember how important and powerful that is, 60% of the homeowners took part in sealing their windows. So that's really interesting. Connecting to values is incredibly important, and maybe a lot of, especially maybe our private landowners and our biologists in the mix probably already know this intuitively, but the science certainly backs this up. People are going to be motivated by what they value, and and you can always look for common ground between the desired behavior, so what we want people to do and what they're valuing. A really cool example is if you think about promoting building green buildings. So think about energy efficient buildings. Maybe it's using solar power. Maybe it's using materials that reduce energy waste and things like that. So you might have two groups. You might have environmentalists, and you might have a group that maybe don't identify themselves as environmentalists. Maybe on a broad political spectrum, they're more conservative. Those aren't they're not thinking about the environment when they make decisions. And so if you think about their values, the environmentalists, they want to have green buildings in their community because it's going to reduce carbon footprint, and it's going to create healthy ecosystems. It's going to create healthier communities. And they're really thinking about their impact on climate change, right? Your non-environmentalists, maybe they're just, their values are frugality. They don't really want to waste things. Well, what is in common? What values can we find in common between these two groups? Both of these groups are also value reducing resource waste in general and saving money. And so when you think about, if say you're creating a message, trying to promote getting more green buildings in your community, instead of only advertising it or talking about this is going to, save the environment and this is going to reduce our city's impact on climate change, instead of just talking and sharing those values, if you really hit home some shared values between multiple stakeholders or multiple groups of, hey, this is going to reduce our resource waste, it's going to save the city money and things like that, you might have more buy-in from multiple groups. And yes, peer pressure works. Using those social norms to help influence behavior. Here's a poll. So there were two different ad campaigns. This is on a bus stop. And there's two different ad campaigns to try to reduce littering in this area. The first one, you probably can't read it. This says, "This is the rubbish dropped around this bus stop since Monday." And the second one is an Olympic athlete, and it says, "Be pressed and proud, let's keep it tidy." So it shows her picking up rubbish or picking up trash. So which one do you think is most effective in reducing litter? About half of us have voted. I'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna stop the polling. All right, so it looks like over half of our participants think that A is much more effective. And then, yeah, under half thinks B. I'll be honest with you, when I first saw this, I thought that was really cool, that ad. It's actually hollow and it's literally garbage. It's not a picture of garbage, it's literally garbage that's put in there and it shows. And so I think that's a really cool ad. It's very powerful. But interestingly enough, that was far less effective because it was actually showing social norms as it's normal and common to leave trash around here. And so it's promoting social norms, but it kind of backfired in a negative way because it's saying that's a normal thing to leave trash around here. Look at all this trash. Versus the ad campaign of B, what it's doing, it's modeling the behavior that you're wanting. It's showing that a social norm is taking care of litter, not letting it on the ground, putting it directly into a trash can or recycling can. So actually B was more effective, which is really interesting. Okay, so I zipped through a lot of those things because I really want to get to this discussion piece. I think it'll be really exciting. Are there any questions so far before we look at some scenarios and apply some of these behavioral science methods? Okay.
Nothing in the chat.
All right. So I'm going to look at some different scenarios that actually has happened within the agency, and thinking about, remember, our two systems of how we behave, thinking about our human instincts that we've learned about, and also thinking about some of those best practices. We can try to maybe have a discussion of what are some methods that we could do to solve these problems. So this first one is a fun one. I experienced this firsthand when I worked at Schramm Education Center a year ago as the outdoor education specialist. So Schramm Park State Recreation Area, it's located in between Lincoln and Omaha near Gretna. And during the 2019 flood, we actually gained some acres along the Platte River. It was a beautiful beach. It was a nice and sandy beach. But all of a sudden, that summer, we started getting a whole new cohort of audience of visitors to our park. And it wasn't the family picnickers and the typical audience that we would typically get. It was a lot of young people, and it was hundreds and hundreds of them along that beach, along the river. It was kind of interesting because there was a news article about it. The news came out because it was just kind of getting a little rowdy, and they compared it to like the Cancun of Nebraska, which is really interesting. Unfortunately, I was very glad to see people having fun, but unfortunately every morning when we got there, there was literally just tons and tons of garbage along the beach, and it was really sad to see. It's not great for the environment. It's not great for our other visitors. That's a photo of the back of a truck, and that's just half of a trip of one morning of us picking up trash afterwards. So it was a really interesting scenario. It was something new. So knowing kind of some stuff that we learned about today, I'm going to open it up to everybody. Remember, you can use the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, feel free to actually discuss. But what would be some methods staff could have implemented to decrease littering? For more context, there was about 1 or 2 trash cans there. We did end up putting maybe 1 or 2 more, but it was still kind of an issue. Okay, do we have any chatting? Oh, thanks. Any thoughts? Make trash bins easy to get to and easy to see. Yep, that was a good one, and that's something that we thought about. And like I said, we did increase the number of trash cans.
One problem with a lot of trash cans is they are too small and they fill up quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So larger, even a dumpster or something easy.
Yeah,
Open.
absolutely. You know, that could have been a really good problem or a really good solution. Maybe signage that shows how litter affects wildlife. Yep, that could help. Add recycle bins. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next scenario? Signage by cans. The Girl Scouts have collected 150 pounds of garbage from this beach. Can your group collect more? Ooh, that's a good one. So that's using some social norms, some peer pressure. I kind of makes me laugh because it's kind of saying, if a Girl Scout troop can pick up trash, I think you guys can do it. Photo of Tom Osborne picking up trash. That's a really good one, and using some social norms. I will tell you, we did get creative, or maybe we were just desperate and frustrated towards the end of the summer. As I greeted people who came in the park, you know, looking at their park stickers, I started handing out trash cans. And to certain folks who seemed like they were the life of the party, I'm not going to lie to you, I said, I said, let me level with you. Do you mind picking up trash afterwards? Like, you guys have fun, but can you at least distribute some of these bags and pick up trash? And a lot of them were really, really nice about it, and they did. And then I think it helped because they saw other people doing it. So we got a little creative with that. I empowered them. Yeah, I tried. Even though I was very frustrated, I was trying to be really nice about it. Okay, so that's a good scenario. Here's another scenario. This is a really cool one. Adam Kester helped me with this scenario. So American burying beetle is an endangered species. Biologists know that prescribed fire and quality range management practices are beneficial to their population. So a lot of times when there's less canopy cover, their studies are finding, and research is seeing, there's higher populations of American burying beetle. They're found in areas that are largely privately owned. Land is managed by private landowners. Think about Nebraska, it's 97% privately owned. So obviously conservation involves working with landowners here. So what are some examples of how you might motivate landowners to consider helping out with these efforts, especially thinking about everything we've just learned?
Maybe you can offer to come in and do land management for them somewhat.
Okay, so that's a good idea. So maybe offering services, and that's probably going to reduce the friction, right? In that rocket ship analogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking when you were using your towel example, I stayed at a hotel in Seattle, and they said, I already like cared about the environment, but they said, if you don't reuse, or if you reuse your towel, we'll give you a $5 gift card to the Starbucks in the lobby. And it was very motivating.
Yeah, okay, so that's increasing the fuel, the motivation, the incentive. That's really cool. Let's see, Ted said burn so that you don't lose your grazing land to cedars. And then Donna said tilling that burning also increases the quality of grass for their animals. Fantastic. So I think these are two examples of, you know, for example, me, I am a self-proclaimed bug nerd, obsessed. I'm so ready for spring so I can look for bugs again, okay? So I have a value for insects, insect conservation. But if I was working with a landowner and that's the only thing I was hitting on is you guys have to care about these beetles and they're so cool and look at how adorable they are. That's probably what I would be saying. How much is that going to really, how much of that message is going to transfer to those landowners? And what these suggestions are saying from Ted and Donna is, okay, I care about beetles, but what do they care about? They might care about quality of grass for their animals. They might care about not losing their grazeland to cedars. So what is that middle ground that we can work with? Kelly said something similar to the signs people can qualify for. that boast about their private pollinator gardens. This property protects an endangered species. That's an awesome one. Or a way for them to be part of a community of those who are stewards. Absolutely, I really like that one. You know, instilling some pride and taking part in that. And that pride might translate to social norms in that area. You know, what if neighbors are talking to neighbors and they're kind of excited about this program they get to be a part of, and then it's promoting social norms. Excellent. Jesse said, a really effective way that works is having burn land management workshops in the field that are co-led by a willing landowner. Oh, that's excellent, Jesse, thank you. So maybe you're saying, instead of just Game and Parks biologists coming and giving information, right, just information of how to do it, it's also co-led by a landowner, and that's maybe influencing those social norms. Awesome. Very good. Okay, I have one last scenario that I want to make sure I get through before I have time, because these are really cool ones. So most of us know about aquatic invasive species, especially zebra mussels. They can have devastating impacts on our lakes and our water bodies. And we know that recreational boating can unintentionally help spread those invasive species between those water bodies. There's actually some really simple steps that just we need boat owners to do, and that's cleaning, draining, and drying their boat once they leave a water body before they get into another one. This is a huge campaign, not just in Nebraska, but across the country, for stopping aquatic invasive species. So what are some methods that might help motivate boat owners to comply with that clean, drain, dry campaign? One thing I think about with this one is, I'll just get the discussion going, is, you know, what do those boaters value? Well, they value going to that awesome lake they love to go at every summer. You know, that's important to them, obviously. That's why they're there, whether they're fishing or they're, you know, recreating. So potentially connecting that, you know, if aquatic invasive species take this lake over, it's going to reduce the capacity for people to use it. It might need some intensive management. I mean, they might even have to shut the lake down. So that is certainly a value you can connect with. Oh, it says from Keith, regionally, Nebraska is #1 in preventing spread of zebra mussels with clean, dry as main defense. That's awesome. So something we are doing, you know, our methods must be working really well. Aaron says providing space for boaters to clean their boats. There we go. That's a really great idea. Maybe we really want that, but maybe if you think about it, we have to make it as easy as we can for boat owners, you know, reducing that friction. Cody says if you have them take a survey, give them a koozie. Boaters love koozies. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Cody. That's probably like increasing that incentive or that fuel. And then Thad says creating cleaning stations near boat ramps. Everyone likes a nice, clean, shiny boat. There you go. So it's connecting, whether they care about zebra mussels or not. Maybe they really care about just making sure that boat looks fantastic. And making it easy, putting it right next to the ramps.
Maybe you give them something to do while they wait too, if they're waiting for it to like dry.
That's an awesome idea. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, Grace, as science educators, we could both be thinking activities for the kids while they wait, or activities for them as well. Donna says zebra mussels can damage their boat and cost lots of money. So make sure mussels don't cost you money. Awesome. That would be an effective campaign as well, I'd hope. Those are really good answers. Thanks, everybody, for contributing. Okay, that is all I have today. I really wanted to make sure I was ending on time and we had time for discussions and questions. But before we leave, I just want to ask you, and you can type it in the chat if you'd like, have your ideas about how people think about behavior change or how we can motivate behavior change, have they changed at all from before this? Or what's something that stood out to you? You can either enter it in the chat or you can just be thinking reflectively in your own head. That's fine. And then the second question is, how might you use some of these things, some of these ways in what you do every day? Or there are different positions and our different roles we play for the agency. Scott says reinforced. Karen says not really. That's good. Yeah, Scott, I think that's a good point. When I was chatting with Adam today, thinking about that scenario, he was talking about connecting, really connecting values to the landowners that he works with. And I said, well, first, you're a fantastic biologists for knowing that, but what's really cool is that science backs that up. That's actual behavior science practices. Do more lead by example. Yes, modeling the behavior that we want to see. Okay, Donna says, I didn't know we were as pack motivated and peer pressure as adults. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's interesting. We think we're kind of immune to that once we get out of high school, but that is definitely not the case. Any other thoughts? Reminder of making things easy, the Netflix example. Yep. Yeah, how can we Netflix cue conservation practices? That's really interesting to think about. Okay. Thank you all so much. You had really great points today, good questions, good discussion. I hope you enjoyed this Lunch and Learn. I know this is a really exciting subject for me. I tried not to nerd out too much and get too down in the weeds with the science, but there's a lot of really cool science out there about these topics. There's whole disciplines of environmental psychology that looks into that, and like I said, behavioral sciences as well. Awesome, thank you everybody. So really quick, just a reminder, I will send out evaluations for this to get your input. I'm always valuing your input. I'm also planning the last half of the year for these topics. So if you have any topics that you think would be really beneficial to you, your division, or the agency, feel free to enter that in the evaluation. And also this recording will be on our YouTube channel, and I will share both the recording. So if you know someone who wasn't able to make it today, or you want to use this to train any staff, this will be available there. I'll also share the PowerPoint as well. Okay. All right. Thank you everybody so much and have a fantastic day.